talking today. Is the first talk in this series. So okay, so next slide. Usual deal. We're recording things. Use the Q&A button and the chat to ask questions. Next slide, please. And so Ken is going to talk about a new national patient deduplication data enrichment facility. I remember when this was just a concept, and it's really exciting how far it's gone. So let me actually hand it over to Ken, who obviously will do this justice. Beautiful map.
Thank you. Actually, there was a different slide. I'm sorry, but this is close enough. I'm going to talk about two things, deduplication and data enhancement. And I just also want to give you guys a real quick update on where we are with CMS. So this is a map of across the United States of the 3,030 counties done by Jared at Nebraska. And the bottom line is everything that's colored red or blue of any color has more than 20 patients in it, which means that we have data, more than 20 patients in 2,800 or 92% of the United States now, which is pretty amazing. The gray doesn't mean there are no patients, it means there's less than 20, and you can see it's heavily populated in less, heavily indicated in lower population areas. So which is kind of, I use this as a launch pad to talk about what deduplication and enhancement is. It's going to be the thing that's we're going to turn this on tomorrow. And so when I say turn it on, what you're going to see in the patient table is some new information. And this is the bottom line, most important thing to hear, is that we are not changing your analysis in any way. This is only informational. Sean is going to lead an education on this next Monday to talk about how to use it, because it's incredibly powerful, but it's also incredibly important. And I'll just give a really easy example of, if we're studying a rare disease, suddenly we can glue Mr. Doe, who's been traveling across the country trying to see specialists. Or, if we have Mr. Doe is in the same institution twice, but for whatever reason has two medical record numbers, now you can combine them together. But there's also not bad things, but consequences. So I encourage you all to go to Sean's lecture on it. There'll be more information coming. This isn't brand new. We're the only group that's ever done this that I know of at this scale. And so a lot of this is a little bleeding edge, and we're going to work on this together. And we'll, in the document, it'll evolve over time, but it'll say things that we recommend now, things that we want you to think about but have caution on, and things that we just need help on. So again, just informational. We aren't changing your analysis. Only an investigator can implement this and actually turn it on and do that linkage. Okay, the other thing I just wanted to give a quick update on Medicaid, Medicare. I just want to give a shout out to Stephanie and team, Peter Leese, who have been working hard to improve the CMS data, Medicare specifically. It's an ongoing quality improvement. It will continue to be improved week after week. Peter is also going to make a more native claims data set available for people who are more comfortable using kind of a claims format instead of us shoving it into OMOP. They will be equivalent, but it's kind of dealer's choice. And then finally, next Monday or Tuesday, Medicaid will be released. Now, this first release of Medicaid, we want it to coincide with the ACTS meeting, to make sure that we can announce that it's available. I did promise Stephanie, who is working unbelievably hard, that we are still in the middle of QAing it, but we rarely have a time where we have so much of the CTSA in one place, and we thought getting it out there and having people start to kick the tires would be really helpful. There is changes in the manifest table and documents on all of these data sets and the goods, the bads, and the ugly. So I just wanted to give people an update and thank everybody for all their help. Talk to you all later.
Well, that's exciting. That's really fantastic. Do you think maybe you could say a few words about your thoughts about how you see this extending or not extending? I'm sure you see it extending to tenant models where involving studies of other diseases.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're, you can imagine we're working on bringing in a tenant that also would, well, I'll talk to it. It's not a promise, but we're working with NCI very closely, and we're really excited about trying to link the data to CRMS registries. Now, I'm not saying we're going to do it, we're working on it, but you can imagine as a great example of where we're bringing in data from other from state registries and linking it to the EHR data, and that would be really helpful. Or in rare diseases is really a really good example. When you have these very small populations and we're studying rare diseases, we need to be able to combine these people because, of course, they're very sick and they go to all the very few clinicians who are there helpful, but they travel across the country. So I think that's really two wonderful use cases. And also just, getting your counts correct is even of itself an enormous data enhancement. Right now, we're ignoring the fact that many people, I think the last time I looked is we're closing 30,000 people we know that are duplicates in N3C. It's a small percentage, but in some population, it's a big deal. So
Ken, that's exciting. And just as an FYI, and I think I'll probably be giving one of the real world talks at some point. It's not scheduled yet on our work with CRMS registries to link Pathomics AI data to steer data. So I'm actually real excited to hear you're working with them too. By transitivity, we could have Medicare and Medicaid. We already have death mortality. Cool. That's exciting. That's great work. Thanks.
Lots of good stuff.
Okay. Yeah. So, all right. So I guess we're up to 7.5 million COVID positive cases and almost 19 million patient records, 2.2 billion clinical observations. So things continue to grow. Next slide, please. And we have a bunch of exciting talks. Background medical therapy with angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors for and angiotensin receptor blockers association with mortality amongst individuals hospitalized with and without COVID-19 infection. The Rural Health Domain Team study on temporal trends leveraging viral variant call files from PPRL data set, oral health team updates, enclave publication intent forms and protocol pads. And a number of us are off pulling together real world data talks as well. Next slide, please. So, okay, so we have Umit Topologlu from NCI and Robinette Renner is also from NCI, are going to be talking about cancer data semantics. And so let me give it over to you folks. Who's going to be talking first?
I will share, Joe. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, it's great. And welcome. Great to see you.
Great. Thanks for the invite. And my colleague, Robinette Renner, who is the program director for our Semantic Infrastructure, and I are pleased to be here. Although we say the future, just wanted to clarify that that's my and Robinette's opinion, what we would like to see in the future, and shouldn't be taken as the NCI's position. So as we discuss in detail. So as mentioned, we are going to be talking about some use cases, select use cases that we focus, that we thought might be relevant to this audience. And your feedback or any ideas, guidance are more than welcome. So we would like to start with a typical healthcare research data ecosystem. And on the left side, you have a lot of data sources, EHRs, CTMS, other clinical system, biorepositories, your genomic data stores. And there are a lot of ETLs going on, in some cases, multiple times to your data warehouse. And some of the institutions have implemented, like my previous one, have implemented natural language processing and the identification pipelines that parse through some of the nodes and whatnot. And pretty much most institutions participating in some type of clinical trial has an electronic data capture system. Very common one is REDCap, and Rave is another one most NCI studies currently utilizing. And then you will be converting that data into some of the CDEs, SDTM, and other formats for FDA submission. And then on the right side, there are a lot of data networks that your institution may be participating. N3C, of course, many of you in this call probably ACT, PICORNet, in some of you, Triantex, and others, also AACR, Genie. What we wanted to divide our talk into three sections by focusing on the first group, that is, we consider the data collection phase. The second part is the data extraction, like how do we get this data for whatever purpose that is. And third one is how do we make this data available for analytics and other purposes, considering FHIR. So let's start with the first section, the data collection. So we wanted to start with some of the consideration and some of the opportunities. And lastly, for each section, we would like to provide what NCI is currently doing for that challenge. So diagnosis data quality is probably one of the very well-known challenge for many clinical researchers. And one of the studies that I have participated, we looked at the structured data, the diagnosis quality, and we have identified a lot of issues that I have two slides that I will briefly mention some more detail. Another challenge, of course, as many cancer studies utilize EHRs for clinical trials, a 2014 paper by Karazi et al. Has identified some of the challenges around the missing data and how inefficient the EHRs in for that purpose. And going back to the diagnosis quality, as you can see from the graphs here that I'm not going to spend too much time, but there are some accurate, some cases suboptimal, and in some cases inaccurate data. And I think this is more important and relevant. On the top section, you will see why the clinicians, what are the attributes for clinicians about this data quality or diagnosis data quality. And B is where this happening is the most within the EHR, and swim lane C describes what they think could help. So this is outcome of the several focus groups we have conducted with multiple oncology specialties, and the clear guidance or response from them is that the diagnosis quality, despite the importance, is not very essential for them. And the progress note is where they use to treat patients. Everything else is required for insurance and billing. Therefore, that's not their main focus. So this is being one issue, and given many observational studies or the way we pull data is relying on these one of the 5 structured diagnoses, right? So let's talk about some of the opportunities. A seminal paper by Melissa Chris and Peter, is talking about, I'm sure many, if not most of you have read this paper that sets the stage, the importance of the semantics and ontology towards the precision medicine. I think this is quite essential and needed, and we take that very seriously at the NCI. Another approach that we see as an opportunity is utilization of smart on FHIR type tools to improve a function that EHR may not be serving well or may not be as user-friendly as it could be for our clinicians to use. So this is one example that I happen to participate, developed a care planning tool for the survivorship clinic. These are all possible opportunities. Another one is, of course, by the alliance in the eye care data, namely within the FHIR CodeX accelerator. The point I'm trying to make here is that some of you may know already that it's not just only focusing the pulling data via FHIR, but also making some changes within the EHR, utilizing smart data elements to capture some important data elements such as cancer diagnosis date or cancer disease status. Those are quite important for many studies, and Robinette is going to talk a little bit more on the other details. So another opportunity that on the NCI divisions is the structured eligibility criteria. So for those who don't know, CTRP is Clinical Trial Reporting Program, and CTEP is part of our division of cancer treatment and diagnosis, running a lot of NCTN and other studies. Both of these groups that we are working very closely with, trying to establish the eligibility criteria of the NCI studies and whether we can establish a knowledge graph or with the NCI thesaurus codes annotated with them. So there has been some preliminary work going on, like as CTRP pulls some of the manual abstraction, there has been a natural language processing pilot, whether we can map those structured eligibility criteria somewhat semi-automated manner. And we are looking, when working with CTEP folks, to if we can engage the trial groups to structure these eligibility criteria. The idea is once that is established, then we can potentially develop some type of intermediary systems that will be pulling FHIR and other standard-based data and use ML or other means of matching patients to clinical trial. This is definitely something we would like to focus, given the importance of MCOT and agreement across the community. Again, this is another opportunity. With that, let me give it to Robinette.
Thank you, Umit. Yes, so the NCI currently provides several semantic resources that can be used to help address some of these challenges and opportunities that Umit mentioned. First is our Enterprise Vocabulary Service, or EVS. They maintain all of our terminology-related offerings. So key to that are our NCI thesaurus and the NCI meta thesaurus. And these two content repositories contain terminologies and ontologies that provide a wealth of information, not just the concepts themselves, but robust definitions and parent-child relationships and synonyms that can be used for a variety of different purposes. But we also work closely with other terminologies, and we maintain mappings to those terminologies. We work with interested stakeholders to maintain their value sets. And then we provide a variety of different tools that can make it easier to access all of these assets. So we maintain web-based browsers and APIs that make it easier to access this information programmatically, along with a variety of different reporting tools. But also, all of the concepts that we maintain serve as a foundation for our other semantic offering, which are common data elements. And next slide, Umit. So we maintain a repository of common data elements, or CDEs, within the Cancer Data Standards Registry and Repository, or the caDSR. And last May, we moved our caDSR to a new vendor-supported platform. So the caDSR2 replaced the system, a custom system that we had been using for more than 20 years. And this new system, the caDSR2, has given us a single interface where we can go in and maintain and access all of the content. And it's also given us some new robust APIs that we're using to help support some of the model mapping initiatives that are out there. But what this new tooling has done is it's given us a lot of efficiencies and given us some modernized tools such as semi-automated CDE matching, permissible value mapping, and that has allowed us to completely restructure our business model for developing and maintaining content. So prior to the caDSR2, all of the CDEs were developed and maintained by our community end users. And now we are able to have a team of NCI curators that are developing and maintaining all of the CDEs, working in close collaboration with the folks that know the content the best, and that's our community end users. And we've been doing this since May of 2022, so about a year now, and it has been well received by the community, and it has really relieved a significant burden on them. On the next slide. So as Umit was mentioning, some of the key components in his first slide were things like REDCap. One of the things that caDSR2 has been able to do is give us additional flexibilities to meet the needs of the community. So not only can you download and content in some standard formats like Excel and XML, with the new tool, we can fairly easily develop custom download formats. So we now have the ability to download all of our forms and CDEs in REDCap format, Rave format, and our NCI curators have a bulk loading capability that allows them to import content in a REDCap library format. So this is really expanding some of our offerings to the community. On the next slide. So some of the projects that we support directly relate to the content in Umit's diagram, and that key part of that is CDISC. So we support not just NCI projects, but other projects. And for the past 15 years, EVS has been the only designated producer of terminology for CDISC. Within the NCI thesaurus, we maintain a subset of terms that are specific for CDISC, and this is used by regulatory requirements for the FDA, amongst other purposes. We currently have more than 126,000 CDISC terms that are maintained regularly. We update them on a quarterly basis, and they're actively being used by the community. We have on average about 50,000 CDISC concepts are downloaded every month. On the next slide. These CDISC terms are also serves as the foundation for CDISC common data elements, CDEs, that we maintain in the caDSR. So in working with CDISC and CTEP, we maintain CDEs for CDISC, C- and SDTM, along with providing a variety of different support mechanisms. Next. Our latest and newest project that we are just starting to kick off is starting to become more involved with MCode and CodeX. So as of last month, the NCI became an official government member of CodeX, and we're starting to look at some of our projects that may align and add value to the CodeX community. So there's a lot of really good use cases, and two that we are focusing our efforts that we think we may be able to add some value are the EHR endpoints for cancer clinical trials, and also the integrated trial matching for cancer patients and providers. So more to come as we start to really become more engaged with the CodeX community and start to focus in on some of these use cases. And back to you, Omid.
Thanks, Robnet. And we are moving into the second section, which is the data extraction. So when we look at the data extraction, of course, probably one of the most important aspects is the bias, such as informed presence bias. Ben Goldstein and colleagues have published this. I'm sure there are many other similar publications, the importance of it that should be considered any type of data extraction from EHR or other data sources. And again, from our community, Elmer and Jeremy has published on the interoperability challenges that indicates even for the same EHR products, interoperability is not guaranteed. And this is, I think, quite important paper to indicate that same EHR will not guarantee, and other measures needs to be taken, such as semantics for the interoperability. One other area that we like to focus is the data inequality. And given the Yan Gao and colleagues have worked looking at some of the genomics data, they have used transfer learning, but basically this is a reality within most EHR or clinical systems about the data inequality that we need to make sure there is a consideration. And lastly, on the consideration that manual abstraction, probably known by many of you, have a lot of issues that Meredith has published in 2008. And I'm sure you can find a lot of similar publications indicating the challenges on the manual abstraction. So given those challenges, what are the opportunities? So of course, I'm sure many of you have heard the US CDI, currently version 3 and 4 is coming soon. And that is indicating some of the data classes that ONC is requesting EHR vendors and health systems to support through API. I think FHIR and HL7 is what the expectation is. I think with this, we will be able to access a lot more data available than previously. And we are working very closely with the ONC, and hopefully we can make some of the use cases more smooth for our community. Another opportunity that we like to indicate is around phenotypes and natural language processing. Again, I think the authors of the first paper is known to this community, Peter and others. The phenopackets are, in my opinion, quite interesting and important for many precision oncology studies that should and could be considered for the data ecosystems. And of course, I'm sure everybody has been talking large language models last couple of months, of course, and natural language processing provides a lot of opportunities. And Hongfeng and colleagues, I think, has published an important paper, in my opinion, that has recommended some ethical consideration, given that a lot of NLP approaches out there. I think we need to consider this recommendation. So, of course, on the clinical research side, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the REDCap's FHIR. Of course, Rave has come up with another FHIR-based support, and if I'm not mistaken, OpenClinica and some other electronic data capture systems support the FHIR interface to the EHRs for clinical research data extraction. And of course, you may agree that the limitation of the FHIR implementation is the availability of the resources or what EHR enabled in respective institutions. There are some other work can be done in that area, such as KIT for the Epic users. This is something I've involved in at my previous institution, where we have started developing a REDCap API to pull data directly from like flow sheets from Epic EHR. So these are some of the opportunities I think our community can take advantage of.
And so one of the key aspects of being able to leverage some of this interoperability and to cleanly extract data is having that good semantic foundation. And within the NCI thesaurus, we have that wealth of information that I was talking about. So the concepts have different semantic types. They have very clear definitions. We have synonyms, relationships between concepts, and mappings to a variety of different terminologies. And all of our common data elements are annotated with these concepts. One of the limitations we have now is that's sort of a shallow linkage. And so within the CDE, you can get concept identifiers, concept names, and definitions, but that's not the whole wealth of information that could really be used to leverage things like machine learning algorithms. So to kind of take this to the next level and give the researchers everything that they need to have that robust querying and analysis capabilities, we're starting on a new project. And with the next slide. This is a project that I find very exciting. It's our shared semantic infrastructure services. So we're working on developing this tighter integration between the CDEs and the terminologies. And this really relies on sort of the graph nature of both CDEs and the concepts. So we're working on building out a graph-based structure using an RDF triple store that will allow users to kind of work their way, delving through CDEs into the NCI thesaurus concepts. And so it will allow additional capabilities with inferencing, querying, mapping, and so forth. So it will allow researchers to do things like just knowing what a patient has been diagnosed with and procedures. They can ask questions like, find me all of the patients that have a disease that impacts the digestive system and had a procedure that was performed on their colon. So learning new information based off of the underlying semantics. So this is, like I said, it's new, it's not in production yet, but I think it has the potential to really help inform some of our machine learning and data extraction capabilities. With that, back to you, Umit.
Thank you, Rabinat. And the last section we would like to briefly touch are around the data models and FHIR. So I'm sure one of the very common work is the data model mapping and harmonization. Of course, given that data models are designed for some specific task in mind, and then although it might change over time, but people are focusing on the common data elements. Yes, it is important to make sure the data is conformant with the CDE and common data element. But as you can understand that the CDEs doesn't define how data is stored, right? Also, the different modeling options, as you can see in this example, test X positive indicator, yes, no, versus result being positive or negative, are two different CDEs and can be stored differently in different data models. And the mapping of these are quite labor-intensive processes that we are going to talk a couple examples of. So just to reiterate, the common data elements are quite important for the FHIR and specifically reuse of data. As you would agree with this paper by Kush et al., they have studied, and that indicates the importance and for the reusability. Data representation is another important for many AI application that came back in January from the Nature Technology Features, indicating data representation challenges as an impediment to the improvements of the healthcare API, AI, artificial intelligence implementations. Of course, this community is very familiar with this. And given that a lot of different data models feeding data, and there is a very Herculean effort of ingesting, mapping, and QA/QC processes to make this data available within the N3C is quite an undertaking. And going back to the NCI side, the Cancer Data Science Hub, which is a component of our Cancer Research Data Commons, or CRDC in short. This is the process that we are currently focusing on, but I would like to maybe focus more on the data standardization, harmonization, and integration. For those who don't know, CRDC has several data commons, from K9 to Genomics data commons to proteomics data commons. And most recently, we are working on the clinical trials data commons, each of which has their own respective data models, and we are developing common data elements to be used for those. So hopefully we are going to see the benefits of being able to access to aggregate of those data commons through this work. And I would like to mention briefly that our team at N3C Oncology Domain team has done 2 high-impact publications recently utilizing this. And as Ken mentioned, with the tenant model, that hopefully we can make it available to this team and everybody to make it more comprehensive analysis with the hopefully linkage to the cancer registries through the PPRL. We are seeing a lot of opportunities there for us to study and learn. So what are the opportunities? Of course, the semi-automated mapping, and Rabinat here has worked on some of those work, and she can explain more in detail if there are questions, but there are some ways to take advantage on somewhat semi-automated mapping. And we also like to emphasize the National Cancer Institute Thesaurus NCI team. And in this work, Schultz et al. Has studied the coverage of the several existing ontologies and indicated that NCIT has around 93% coverage, I think, instead of trying to create a custom biomedical terminology. So moving from the semantic model into common data model, there are a lot of work being done, and one of which that Rabinat is going to briefly talk is around the code map services. That is a joint work of the NCATS with Ken and FDA colleagues and the ONC. But basically, the first version of it has focused on the bridge. Now it is going to be focusing more on the FHIR. I'm sure Ken is going to be able to explain in detail for those who are interested to hear. Rabinat?
Yeah, thanks, Umit. So as Umit was saying, the NCI is participating in the next phase of work for the Common Data Model Harmonization Initiative. The diagram on the right is from the initial version, which was using Bridge as a hub. But this work is really helping to facilitate the mappings and transformations between a variety of different ways of representing the data. And the NCI is helping this by serving as a repository with the caDSR of the information that is needed to kind of find the commonalities between those models. So the different data elements and ways of structuring them and making it available so that end users can, from a semantic standpoint, understand how different elements are used across the models and how those if they have the same semantic meaning, how they are being represented, how the data is being collected, and storing within the CADSR all of those cross-model mappings, but then taking it to the next level. There's one thing to have that semantic information, but at some point, end users will need to transform the data. So we're working on having a way to store example transformations that can help make things a little bit easier for end users. So we're hoping that this is one way that kind of helps support the CDMH project and makes it easier to work with all of the different models. On the next slide. So the abundance of data models also is evident in the cancer research data commons that Umit was talking about. So we have a variety of really good data commons that have excellent data models and data elements that their data dictionaries were all developed for their purpose and they're meeting their needs. But now we want to be able to aggregate data from all of those different data commons. So getting data from the genomics data commons and the clinical trials data commons. And the CRDC needs a little help in how do we get all of that information together. So we are working on several different ways to support the CRDC. The first is developing those standard data elements. And in order to do that, we've developed a community-driven process. So working very closely with the different nodes within the Cancer Research Data Commons, and they're leading the effort in prioritizing those data elements that they need to have standardized. Then once we've identified those data elements, it gets passed off to a team that does extensive research in how all of the different data commons are using those data elements, but also how they're being used by the broader community. So how is MCO using it? How is HTAN using it? And they come up with recommendations that are then sent back to the data commons and other components within the CRDC, and where they participate in an RFC process. So we get their feedback and we incorporate that into the standards. That all of that information that gets passed off to the NCI curation team, and we develop the common data elements that the community needs. And it's important to note that while we are developing standard data elements that are used across the nodes, we're also developing data elements that are use case specific. So there are going to be data elements that only the genomics data commons needs. So we are developing those, and those are all publicly accessible within the caDSR too. But having just the data elements is not sufficient. You need context for those data elements. So we've also started work, we're in the initial stages of developing out a data model to help support search and aggregation across the different data commons. But we also recognize when you've got a lot of data models and a lot of data dictionaries, there's going to be a mapping effort. And we are working on providing support to the community. We are providing an expert here within NCI that will work in close collaboration with the different data commons and other members of the community who they know their data best, but so we work with them and help them out with their mapping efforts. And then to Umit's point, manual mapping is painful. So we're working on developing some tools that will make it easier for mapping transformation and validating the data once it's been transformed. Then our final piece of support for the cancer research data comes with governance. As we standards change and they need to change as our scientific knowledge advances. So we're developing a data standards governance board. This board will be pulling in representatives from the different data commons and other components within the CRDC, along with the semantics experts within NCI, and they'll work together to approve the scope for our next release of standard data elements, and also approve any changes to those standard CDEs and the models as we get new information and things grow and develop. So back to you, Umit.
Umit, can I? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
if I could say something that I might be able to add to this, to the community, I think if you haven't explored just exactly what NCI has with the EVS and caDSR, it's really quite an amazing infrastructure that's sustained for all of the country to use, and it's really an amazing resource. But as it specifies, Ken Wilkins added, will there be an API? And what we often refer to as the Common Data Model Harmonization Project actually was the underpinnings of how all the different common data models work together. And to answer your question, Ken, the hope is that we can push those mappings and the ETL to the caDSR, and you will be able to use this as a service through an API. So for instance, I have Pcori version 4.x, and I want to convert to OMOP 5.3.1. Here is my data. Hit the button, and it does basically what we're doing in N3C. And the APIs, I think, that you're asking for is what we're going to use in this amazingly new infrastructure that they've helped put together. So we're going to be working on this for the next year or so, and I hope that, if I'm answering your question correctly, that we will be able to deliver what you're asking. But that's the test.
Thank you, Ken. So a lot of folks, of course. And with that, we thank you for listening, and I think we may have some time, right, Joel, for questions if there's any.
Yeah, no, we've got 10 minutes. So other questions, Ken Wilkins, that sounds awesome. Thanks for working with NCI, CVID, and EVS on that.
Yes, Ken is a great partner, and we are very happy to work with him and NCATS. So
what role do you see? And I know you mentioned neural networks in one context of mapping, but certainly the proliferation, as we know, as you've described so excellently, the proliferation of different vocabularies and data representations continues to grow. And what role do you see for machine learning in helping to automate the maintenance of maps?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know if I know much. Maybe Rabinette, you can add some as well, since you have worked on this area. But given a lot of folks are working on the semantic distance, I guess probably we can look review. But I'm sure with this new language models, whether we can use this Instruct GPT to look and learn and serve better on this mapping, maybe. I'm just thinking loud. I don't know, Rabinette, if you have some opinion.
I think the role of a semi-automated mapping approach is important because, unfortunately, we can't just pick one terminology and commit to it. We need the ability to kind of gracefully pivot between terminologies. And some of the roles I see with that is not just with machine learning, but also graph databases and being able to connect, have that web of relationships that you can traverse and be able to find those relationships. So I see it as a combination of machine learning and graph databases.
Oh, that's interesting. While you were talking, just as an experiment, I typed into Chat GPT asking it, but it thought. That's the potential. I'm not going to go through and parse it. It seemed to be generating a very bland but positive statement. No, that's very interesting. Other questions or thoughts? So Andrew, you're a panelist, right? I'm kind of wondering, just in terms of a conversation, the relationship between CADSR and the like, and Odyssey and OMOP. I mean, I know this is often discussed, but sort of in terms of the real world and what you guys are dealing, what is it kind of looking like in terms of tools?
I think Ken actually might be able to answer that a little bit more specifically. I haven't been very involved in the CADSR work specifically, though. We have been building out mappings between the NACER cancer registry, all of the different ways in which staging data needs to be represented to fully accommodate all of the semantic richness of data in there, and other work, including work that I know Umit and others have helped to bring into N3C from HEMONC and other terminologies. And there's been a lot in this general space. The specific interface with CADSR is it's not an area that I can speak to with great depth. So I'm wondering if either Umit or Ken can kind of fill in gaps on Odyssey specific stuff with respect to CADSR.
Actually, I think I might be able to add a little bit to that. So we have an active project where we are taking the data elements that are within the OMOP model, and we're developing common data elements for those within the CADSR. And those will be incorporated in as part of the code map project.
Cool. And I could imagine that one could use Atlas and Athena and tools like that to generate concept sets that would be equivalent at least to some CADSR elements. I don't know if all, I mean, whether the representation power is equivalent.
Yeah, so from an Athena perspective, since that's a vocabulary, closest equivalent would be the NCI, the NCI thesaurus, which currently is not incorporated within the Athena vocabulary, but making those mappings is something that, while we're not currently doing it, it is something that could potentially be done.
Mm-hmm. Great. Oh, that's fantastic. So, I mean, I've personally been kind of on both sides of this this divide, being in both the cancer world and thanks to the N3C and COVID and the Odyssey world, and obviously they overlap a lot, and sort of mapping between them is obviously really important.
Yes, I think, as Ken briefly mentioned, this tenant model that NCI is quite interested in, hopefully we'll make it happen, like bringing the cancer registry data, and hopefully we can utilize some of the extensions available. It would be quite powerful, and maybe later we can expand other phenotypic options like phenopackets, including some of the genomic data available to our Genomics data commons or other available data sets. That is probably going to make this enclave a powerful tool for many researchers. So we are very excited from that perspective. Great.
Okay, well, thanks for a really very interesting presentation. I learned a lot, and thanks everybody for coming. Any last comments or thoughts?
I mean, we are very happy to hear anybody with some ideas. Of course, we are looking at some of the real world evidence domain and some of the machine learning aspects. Hopefully we can talk some other time, but if you have ideas, would like to collaborate, please. I mean, I think you can reach out to us through some of the emails that I shared at the end of the slide. So we are looking forward to.
Excellent. Well, fantastic. And Warren Kibbe says really exciting work, and I certainly agree. All right. Well, thanks. And this is really great. And we'll see you next session. If people have interesting real world projects that they want to talk about, please reach out to anybody on the team, including myself or.
Yeah, I would like to hear the CR work that you mentioned, Joel, sometime.
Great.
hopefully.
Yeah, no, that would be wonderful to chat. I'd be happy to talk offline, but I need to get scheduled, for that, but that would be actually fun. So be great to catch up. All right. Well, thanks. Take care. Have a
Bye-bye.
great week. Bye-bye.